It was on a Wednesday night 50 years ago, June 8th, 1966, that the view of Topeka from atop Burnett's Mound was about to change forever.
An F5 tornado with a path 22 miles long. Melissa, 10 miles of that tornado ripping right through the heart of Topeka. From here on Burnett's Mound, the storm went on to Washburn, the downtown area, and on to Oakland before trailing off to the northeast.
When it was all over, 17 people lost their lives. Nearly 600 others were injured. 1,000 homes flattened, 2,000 more damaged, and a city was left to wonder how it would pick up from what even back then was more than $100 million in damage.
This is exactly the hour 50 years ago tonight that the tornado rolled through. And in our 1 hour special with you, we're going to have people track the path of the storm as they're sharing their stories. And of course, we couldn't do this show without talking in our interview later with Bill Curtis, whose line is forever burnished in Topekans' memories, "For God's sake, take cover."
We begin with the voices of some of those who have since passed away, but who were instrumental in sounding that initial alarm and coordinating the first response. WIBW TV photographer Ed Rutherford spotted it first. At 6:55 p.m., June 8, 1966, he radioed from Auburn that this monster was on the ground headed for Burnett's Mound.
Like a giant whirlwind. It was kind of light in color out by itself from a kind of a squall line of dark clouds. The sun was shining bright. But about 500 feet off the ground was a large barn coming apart. So there was no doubt as to what it was.
Little did they know it had already hit homes there and claimed its first 2 victims. Based on that account, newly promoted station manager Charlie Ross gave the order, go on the air and warn residents.
I was dispatched to Burnett's Mound.
That word sent Topeka police officer David Hathaway to Burnett's Mound. At 7:02, he saw it too, roaring right for him.
There is a tail that seems to be dropping down, unknown whether it's hitting the ground or not, and then rescinding back up.
From the control tower at Billard Airport, Felix Burkhart also had an eye to the sky. In 2001, he recalled his initial conversation with the National Weather Service office across the airstrip.
I looked out to the southwest, Burnett's Mound. The tornado was right behind it, looked like. It was huge. They said, how fast was it going? I said, 35 miles an hour. That's what they said. They said impossible. They just don't go that fast. So they hung up on me.
But by 7:03, they believed. A man named James Ward captured this incredible film from his home near the base of Burnett's Mound. The siren sounded, and as the funnel tore its way over, Bill Curtis uttered the infamous phrase.
Or on the northern edge, for God's sake, take cover.
When the sirens blew, when Bill Curtis told us to go to the basement, we did.
When Bill Curtis came on TV, Kathy went and grabbed my purse and said, was crying, "Mommy, let's go up to the basement."
I flashed then. What do I say? What do you say to convince people this is not a drill? This is the real thing.
And we came back to 29th and Gage, and we could see it at the top of it coming.
When I saw it, I'll never forget that.
So I looked out the doors, and there was this big black cloud, and I thought, well, it's coming right for us.
I saw this beautiful, beautiful cloud. I said, oh, but it's scary. And then a lot of debris.
I could see debris flying from the university, twisting up in the air, and that's when I ran.
At the base of Burnett's Mound, Officer Hathaway was desperately working to warn drivers to turn back. At approximately 7:15, he himself made it up the incline to brace himself under the 470 overpass. He saw radio broadcaster Rick Douglas blown down the hill and the monster strike.
There was a residence on the city side of the mound that literally exploded. The tornado passed the area I was in, and then it became so very, very quiet. No dust, no anything but devastation. It looked like a war zone.
Blocks from the mound, then Police Chief Dana Hummer crawled out of his own basement and headed to work. He described the scene in a 2001 interview.
I got down on 29th Street. A man was looking for his daughter who'd been in the dance studio. I would have seen the look on his face. Never forget the look on his face. People just had a terrible look on their face of fear. Where's my loved one? I I would ever recover.
In the area near 29th and Gage in South Topeka, destruction at its utmost. Cars overturned, houses completely smashed, open gas mains, water spraying into the air from broken water pipes.
We lived on Twilight Drive, and I heard on the radio that there was a tornado at Burnett's Mound. I opened the back door, right there, and there it was. I was just, that's what blew me away. And it's just like they say, it's like a freight train. And our house, it wasn't hit, but afterwards I smelled gas. And on the other side, it was devastated.
We lived at 4355 Twilight Drive in 1966. We had a daughter babysitting over across Shunga Creek in a slab house. So we decided to go get her and the kids and bring them back. We got them and we came back to 29th and Gage, and we could see it, the top of it coming. And it was so large we couldn't tell which way it was going. I got the front door open and they all got inside, and I was the last one in. And so I threw myself on top of them, and my wife had got in, and she was in the back of the rec room on the floor. We had about 5 seconds before it come in the back door. It was noisy. It was terribly noisy. And then it got real quiet. And I looked up and I could see the tornado. And I went ahead and looked all the way up, and I could see blue sky up there through the tornado. And then I decided, well, that other half is coming. So I ducked my head back down. Part of the metal frame to hold them tiles fell down on top of that one tile, and she couldn't move, and she was yelling bloody murder because she couldn't move. We survived.
My family lived at 2532 Southwest 22nd Street Park, which is a corner of 25th and Randolph. My mom was at church and my stepfather was working. So that left us siblings here at home by ourselves. And my father called and talked to my sister, who was 14 years old at that time, and told her that there was definitely a tornado coming and that we needed to take cover. We huddled in a corner behind an old stuffed chair. And I can remember the pressure in the room changing, and I can remember the noises were just horrible. And I remember looking up and hearing glass break, and our dining room window had blown out, and we had lost trees and things of that nature in our yard. And come to find out, our roof did rise, but it did not come off the house. We were very fortunate for that. None of us kids were injured at all. I mean, there was like a house a block away from us. They were completely down to their foundations. And we had to walk out of the neighborhood, and we had to jump over electrical lines to get out. I really believe that my sister kept us together, and she made us do what we had to do to keep safe. It was like life before the tornado and then life after the tornado. And seeing the destructions that were so close to us, that didn't happen, that we were protected because we were in the right place at the right time, the right place for us and our family.
We lived at 2805 Valley Brook, which is halfway between Gage and Fairlawn. I was 13 years old, and we'd been out playing, all the neighbor kids had, and my mom made us come in the house when she started hearing about the tornado around the Auburn area. So we were in there just watching WIBW, watching Bill Curtis. Well, we were underneath Dad's workbench that he'd had built, and we could see when this other piece of it came over our house. It just got really, really dark, and Mom said she could hear. I didn't hear nothing. I was probably scared to death. So just a few minutes later, my granddad shows up. So we went up behind McEachran Elementary School, which wasn't very far. This is behind McEachran Elementary School, and he had a friend that lived up there, and he was going to try to find his house. He had no idea where it was. There was just nothing but total devastation there. Well, I was a Boy Scout. They called us the next day to start helping with the debris. We would show up at the Shawnee County barn, which is where the Harley shop is now, and they would assign us an area where to go work. One time we worked on the Washburn campus, helping with the removal of the tree limbs. I got some really cool pictures of the Washburn campus. I had a 110 camera that I had in my pants pocket, and wherever we'd work, I'd take pictures. And we was working right along National Side, National Guard troops, and Red Cross would come out and bring sandwiches at lunchtime and stuff. And I think we worked for a week and a half, 2 weeks. This is in the Central Park area also. I did a lot of work in the Central Park area. The devastation there was incredible. The older homes, they just, they weren't flattened, but they were just gutted. It was quite an experience as a kid to be involved in the cleanup. And it's kind of left an impression on me. It was like I got to see what it had done and to help other people with their cleanup, and you kind of felt bad that I was going to go home and I had a bed to sleep in, and maybe the guy I just helped clean his house up didn't.
After lots of homes were damaged in the area surrounding Burnett's Mound, the tornado's path brought it here to Washburn University. I'm standing in front of Carnegie Hall. This building is still standing after all that, but it and every other building on the Washburn campus suffered major damage, and 5 of the buildings here were completely lost. At that time, the damage total for Washburn alone was put at $10 million. Naturally, everybody sees the Washburn campus a half-century later is absolutely thriving, but at that time, on that fateful night, people were huddled, they were frightened in lower levels of buildings here, and in the surrounding neighborhoods of Washburn, 4 lives were lost.
I was located at the time of the tornado at the second house west of 17th and Washburn. The tornado was coming over the sirens. We heard all the news, and so I took my family and my mother to the basement, and my father was kind of stubborn. He says, "Oh, I've heard these so many times before." He said I wasn't going to pay attention. He finally came down the basement. And then I remembered my elderly neighbors that lived in the first home, the Whitneys. And so I got up and I ran over. They had a door that faced our home on the side, and I was knocking on the door. When I heard the roar coming, when it was really close, I knew that, it was close, to hitting that area. And I looked up by the Stauffer Science Hall, and I could see debris flying from the university, twisting up in the air, and that's when I ran. After the tornado had hit, I went back over, and the house had kind of lifted up and shifted, and he fell into the basement, and he survived, and his wife was trapped underneath parts of the chimney that was in the house. And we got her out. They took her to the hospital, but she died some hours later, I would imagine, from shock. Some stories that are kind of interesting. My father worked manual labor and kept his billfold in his overalls. And he had taken them off, and the tornado hit and cleaned out the whole upper floor completely, except part of a bed. The overalls were gone, and he found his billfold under the bed. Had $200 or $300 in it. Sometime after the tornado, a woman called me from St. Joe, Missouri, and found my First Communion prayer book and wanted to know if I wanted it back.
I'm living at the same address as was in 1966. We tore down what was left and then rebuilt. We had a 14-month-old baby, and I had washed diapers that day. But it looked kind of threatening, so I didn't want to hang them outside on the line. So I hung them up in the basement, clotheslines in the basement, and I had just lopped them over the lines. When the sirens blew, when Bill Curtis told us to go to the basement, we did. We went to the basement. It will be in my mind forever, you know, the way he said it. And the way he said it, you knew he meant it, you know, for God's sake, take cover. And we did. And we could hear the tornado coming, and it was a tremendous, tremendous sound. But as it went over, we must have been right over our house. Those diapers lifted up off of the clothesline in the basement and just kind of hung there, suspended in midair. And then after it passed over, they just kind of fluttered down to the floor like leaves falling off of a tree. And that was scary to see that happening. This is a pass that we had to get in order to get back in the neighborhood. Our house was totally destroyed. We had an airplane bungalow, and the top part of our house was gone. This is our car. It was probably moved approximately 50 feet and landed in the neighbor's tree. We had lots of stuff in the attic like people do. That part of the house was all gone. But the only thing that was left up there was a cardboard box full of Christmas tree ornaments. And there was where that box of Christmas tree ornaments was up there. And that was the only thing left. And not one ornament was broken. How do you explain that?
When Bill Curtis and them was up there and they said that this was coming across Burness Mound, we all started heading for the basement. And we didn't quite get down there, that the wind had caught some trees and was blowing around. My brother, my wife, and aunt and uncle and was here, and we all had to go outside to the house into a underground basement there. When we got down, and all at once it just started everything banging and everything else. But it sounded like it was about 15 freight trains going over, and it was so loud, and I thought the whole house was coming down the way it sounded. And I had a 2-year-old baby girl there with us, and we had a wash tub, and we kind of put that over, but so she couldn't get pinned under there. We just put a wash tub over, so if there was any falling debris, it would have kind of saved her, you know. And it just tore trees up, trees fell down. It was just in the path. It just came across Washburn University and had put cars up in trees and stuff like you had Volkswagens up in trees. Well, we went into the house, and it broke all the windows out in the house and upstairs and everything else. Just say your prayers. Yeah. And that's about all you can do.
They had a business in College Hill, which is right next to the university, and it had been hit, and they were there. My dad had just come from weekend warrior work and came back and met my mom at her business, and they turned around and he said, "Oh, look at all those birds over there." And my mother says, "Those aren't birds, those are housetops." And she says, we have to get inside. And about that time, across the street, 2 little kids came running out of their house, and they were in their underwear and barefooted. And there was a car parked in front of the house, and 2 people were in it. It was a babysitter with a friend. And the kids didn't know what to do. They came running out. Mom took them, Dad, and they took them inside and got them underneath this counter in the front of the office part. My grandmother was the bookkeeper, and she was in her office, and she climbed under her desk. And so then the tornado hit, And my mother said that they all went up and hit the bottom of the desk, of the counter, and were actually suspended in air.
Tornado went in the front and out the back, wiped out the front glass and took out the back wall.
They were in a strip mall. The business next to them was gone. And the business next to that was a laundromat, and there was one wall standing, and on that wall was a pop machine, and standing between the wall, on that wall and the corner, was a man. He was the person who was in charge of the laundromat, and he was standing there, and nothing else was left.
Scary time. You didn't know what was going on, and the early part, they didn't know how to get out of there.
And they were standing there, not knowing where to go or what to do, because you didn't know where the tornado had gone.
It was hard to find where you were because you couldn't, nothing looked right. It was all different. It was all gone.
And we were very lucky. So even if Burnett's Mound couldn't protect us like it's supposed to.
I was on my first for-real job. I worked at Falley's grocery store, and it was at 10th and McVicker. So after a while, all the customers left, and the manager on duty told us to go downstairs, but then we were all teenagers, and we didn't stay downstairs. We went outside, and I remember walking outside and seeing everyone's aprons blowing up in the air and hanging onto the rail between the in and out door. And first thing we looked up, we could see different little clouds swirling within that huge tornado. And we could even see the sun shining on the other side of it, which was the strangest thing. And we just couldn't believe it was a real tornado. And we had no idea how bad it was until we tried to get home that night. And you never forget something like that.
Shirley and others were watching as the twister, packing winds up to 250 miles per hour, churned its way past Washburn and toward the Capitol building, where it bounced off the dome and veered toward downtown, gashing office buildings, smashing businesses and homes. The city's bus fleet tossed like tin cans. It even sucked rugs and furniture out of the National Reserve Insurance Building, along with disease cultures from a state lab housed on some of its floors.
I was 9 years old at the time. My dad and my sister and myself, we went to the Coffee Cup Cafe, and that's at 10th and Kansas Avenue. It was pretty dark out, and my dad asked the waitress and stuff, do you have a basement here? And they said, no, we don't have a basement. So my dad grabbed me and my sister and they says, let's go. So we leave the Coffee Cup Cafe and run next door to the Eagles building. So we get in there and there's huge plate glass window, and I'm sitting at the door. My dad goes, can you see anything? And I look out and I can see the roof of the museum fly off. It was there. I mean, it was stuff flying clear up in the air, and so we take off running. My dad goes, get away from the windows. They're gonna implode. Head to the basement. So we run to the basement. As we're running, there's a banquet, big banquet going on, probably 50 people in this banquet with, some kind of special dinner going on. We get around, one lady leaves the place and she carries her salad down with us, and she's gonna eat her salad. And as soon as we hit the stairs and we start down, the whole place blew. I mean, there was stuff flying around. The noise was just unbelievable, stuff flying around. You could hear it hitting and stuff like that. So then it became quiet. And they give an all clear, so we go upstairs, we walk around the corner, and that banquet room was empty. There was nothing in there. Some lady comes, tells my dad, you told them to get away from the window, and there's several people just injured from the flying glass. So it happened just as soon as we hit the basement. We get in the truck and we swing around and we head down 10th Street. And as we're going past the Capitol, I tell my dad, look, there's a chunk out of the dome, the Capitol dome's missing. We drove straight to California and spent 2 weeks in California. We basically, our truck was totaled because on the side, all the glass had embedded into the side of the truck.
We were living temporarily in a rented house about 3 doors south of the house that we owned, apartment house, 9th and Jefferson. It had a basement. The house we were living in didn't. When Will Curtis came on TV said, for God's sake, get in a basement or get in undercover. Kathy went and grabbed my purse and was crying, "Mommy, let's go up to the basement."
Hazel and 6-year-old Kathy headed for the basement. Her husband Calvin and 2-year-old daughter Christy were trying to get home from checking their horses outside town.
Then when he pulled in the backyard, it hit, and he grabbed Christy and threw her under the truck, crawled in on top of her. Sometime during the next few seconds, a tree next to the truck fell on top of the back of the truck. He felt it on his back. Then it got real calm. He thought it was over with, crawled out. It was the eye of the storm. A big board hit him in the head. He crawled back underneath on top of Chris and waited it out. He described a lot of noise. He just said he couldn't imagine the amount of things that he saw flying around. Kathy had problems in the basement. I had to cover her ears. She was screaming real loud. It hurt. When they talk about it, a loud roar, a loud noise, sounding like a loud train or something, that's what I heard, a loud roar that just didn't stop.
When it was over, Calvin and Hazel went looking for each other.
And I was starting to come across the street to come to see where he was, and he stopped me. There was a big power line in the street. He said, "Don't cross it, Hazel." And he said, "But turn around and look." And as I did, the house was gone. I didn't know the house was gone until he mentioned it to me, that there was no house there. And we both kind of got emotional there for a little bit, you know.
In a matter of hours, friends and family turned out to help, and neighbors helped neighbors.
I had to go back home and get this one lady a pair of my shoes. She was barefoot, and when they talk about putting your shoes on, you know, it's true, you know. She didn't have her shoes, so I gave her a pair of my shoes.
A night that would shape reactions for a lifetime.
So I feel safe. I feel safe as long as I get to an underground.
I was working at the Dairy Queen at 6th and Brenner, and I had a young high school student working with me. Looked out the window and was seeing the clouds kind of whirling around.
My mom had called my dad that night to tell him that there was a tornado at Brunette's Mound and was coming his direction of where he worked. And he could hear the sirens going off, he said.
I looked across the street in the parking lot and there was a house there. We got about halfway over and I looked at Lee and I says, "You go ahead and join them," because I says, I'm going to run back and get the cash register drawer. So I went back and got the drawer and come out. And I looked across the street and I didn't see a soul. So I went on over to the house. There was 2 doors, and the first door I came to went downstairs. And as I went through the door, I could hear crashes and thunder and a lot of noise. And by the time I got downstairs and found everybody, they was standing around, and I said, "Well, the tornado's here." And about that time, the house vibrated, and the ground vibrated, and there was a little old lady with me, and I kind of leaned up against her and got over her against the wall, and things got real noisy and loud. What really surprised me is I was standing next to the wall and the ground vibrated just like he was in an earthquake or something. We was coming up trying to get out of the basement of the house, and the doors were hard to get open. We finally got them open and come out of the basement, and we was really shocked because there wasn't a thing standing. Everything was gone. Even looked over at the Dairy Queen building, and it was completely gone. All that was there was a walk-in cooler. There was no place to go. We walked up 6th Street, up over the viaduct, went to stopped at the Santa Fe Hospital, and I left the cash drawer there because I didn't want to be running around all over with a cash drawer. And I stood on the middle of 6th Street Viaduct and turned traffic because beyond that you couldn't get through because of the debris in the street. Power lines was down and sparks were flying on east of Dairy Queen.
He stayed to direct traffic so nobody would get hurt for at least a half hour before the police could get there to do that job.
The next day our car was completely covered with a tree. All you could see was just the front end sticking out. We worked most of the afternoon trying to cut the car out and get it so we could get it out. Pulled it out. There wasn't a window not broken. The inside was plastered black with tar and dirt and dust. I got inside and lo and behold, it started right off and it didn't have a flat tire.
For me, my dad is my hero for that night.
Now, I'm not scared of tornadoes, but I sure do respect them.
The tornado wasn't quite done yet. Once it passed through downtown, it cut through the Santa Fe shops and came knocking on doors here in the Oakland neighborhood. Many of the trees and houses you see lining Atchison Street today were chewed up in the path of the storm.
We're coming from Sutton's over the Sardu Bridge. We heard the sirens. I saw this beautiful, beautiful cloud. I said, oh, but it's scary. And then a lot of debris.
Mary Rangel and her husband were headed home to the Oakland neighborhood, the tornado on their heels. In the back seat, daughter Rita, 10 years old.
Pretty skies, dark sky. That's what I remember, is the pretty sky coming thinking, as soon as we can get home, it's gonna be okay.
When we got home, and there's my dad sitting in the kitchen, my sister-in-law sitting in the kitchen, and what in the heck are you doing? Get the kids in the basement. They said, no, it's not coming. Oh, yes, it's coming. It's coming. My dad will not come. He will not come. And my mom cried and cried. And then here comes my dad at the last minute. When he saw Santa Fe things coming over to the house, he flew in with one of them. And the door threw him down into the basement.
My Aunt Jenny had 2 tables that were in the corner. And those 2 tables were what we got underneath. And I just remember frantically trying to reach my dad's hand because I needed my dad. And I remember just, Dad, because you could just hear all the noise, you could hear everything that was falling down on you. And I thought, I need my daddy. And it was just like our fingers were just, and I thought, it's just not meant to be.
And we were all down there crying. Just, my husband says, oh, hon, this is it. I guess we're gone.
And all the noise, the roar, swear the train was coming right on top of us because of the sound. And then just all of a sudden, quiet, just so peaceful. And you come out and you look outside and the skies are blue, the clouds are white, and all the wreck, all the mess that you see.
Rita did hear one noise.
The house was over there, but Mom had been cooking a dinner, and then a little ding, ding, ding of the oven going on that dinner was done.
Mary took off running the few blocks to Our Lady of Guadalupe, where 2 more of her children had been. They were fine, but the neighborhood?
I came back, there was nothing at all. At war zone, that's what it looked like. It just debris. All the houses were just gone, you know. They just cleared it up for us. It was terrible. And when I came over here and saw my house, the piano was right over there. I said, where's my house? Well, my house, see how it's facing this way? Well, it just took the house and turned it around. And there was only 2 walls of it left up on the street, up there by the alley. The Kittners were up in the alley, but they wouldn't take cover. They went with a house. Past the alley, my brother's house over there, he had nothing. There was not even a board to pick up. Santa Fe, big old boxcars, half of the boxcars were on top of my mom's bedroom.
Rita and Mary say it was several hours before any emergency crews made it to their neighborhood. Debris blocked the streets, and they had no idea their scene was mirrored on block after block across the city. Eventually, help did arrive, and they recalled the Red Cross and Salvation Army offering relief in the following weeks and months as they cleaned up and rebuilt. Mary even splurged on her new home.
The basement, of course. Of course, the basement. That was the first thing we might have not had enough money, but that's what's going to be in there.
Theirs was the last house to feel the full force of the tornado's wrath. It left Oakland on approach for Billard Airport.
The tornado has just passed over the Weather Bureau office. It did break out several windows here. Many planes are strewn across the airfield, and at least one airplane is afire.
It came right down across the Santa Fe Railroad, right down just like it was on final to land on runway 4. After it hit, things got real quiet. I walked outside the hangar on the north side, and the tornado was right out here in the middle of the field. Stuff was spewing out the side that was plywood and roofing and 2x4s and everything. After it got off the end of the runway, after it raised up in the air and disappeared.
It was gone, but it left behind a city in ruins, 1,000 homes destroyed, 2,000 more damaged. The shock would soon turn to resolve, bolstered by more than 4,000 outside volunteers who would descend on the city ready to help. An hour before the tornado bore down on Topeka, another tornado hit Manhattan. It destroyed 11 homes, damaged 328 others, and did $2 million damage to the Kansas State University campus. 65 people were hurt there.
I was 6.5 years old, but right around 6:30, my dad came home. He was a traveling salesman. He just missed the Manhattan tornado. And he was going, oh, thank God, I just missed that tornado. And then the next thing I know, we were going to the basement. Sirens, that's all you heard for 25, 30 minutes. I was just stuck down the basement. My parents would not let me go upstairs. See, we drove all over town. We went to Washburn, drove by Washburn. We drove downtown, saw the car lots, all the cars upside down. We saw Jayhawk drug. I remember taking video of that. Then we went out to 29th and Gage and took a lot of pictures along the interstate, driving down the interstate so you could see how wide the damage was. My mom was driving the car and my dad drove down the interstate. It's just something you can't forget. I mean, it's just the damages. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's like 3/4 of a mile wide, just like it went through the whole city. Just lawnmower went right through the city. Well, there was a big tree. I mean, it was literally pulled out of the yard. When we went to Washburn, we went out to take the video. This is something I'll never forget. When I got out of the car, the smell of pine, it was so strong. All the trees, there was hundreds of huge trees that were, all of them were damaged. Every tree was damaged or just gone. I mean, but the smell of pine, it was so strong. It's something you just never forget. I was 6.5 years old. So I mean, I can remember everything, but I just thought that was every day. Every time there's a tornado, I thought every tornado was like that.
"50 years ago tonight, Helen and Mary Kristen Curtis were here on campus in married housing and ironically had moved to a building to the lower level of a facility that had been flattened by the storm. Meantime, back at Channel 13, the husband and father, Bill Curtis, was stationed at the weather map, giving his famous warning, "For God's sake, take cover." We recently visited with Bill Curtis, interviewing him in Chicago on the 5th floor of 400 West Erie Street, which for the past 25 of his 50 years there in Chicago has been the home of Curtis Productions.
We were down at the South Pole and everything. I didn't go.
As soon as we got here, Bill Curtis wanted to show us around in what is largely a museum, honoring his amazing career and his global odysseys.
So I have 8 edit rooms.
A museum of photos from Mexico to Moscow to Machu Picchu and beyond.
This was a huge mangrove forest. And this is from Mongolia, where we've gone about 3 times over there. A guy was looking for Genghis Khan's tomb. These are primarily the New Explorers. That was a science education program on PBS. And, we went all over South America.
Too many awards to keep all in one place.
I don't know what we have. You get tired after a while of the same old stuff, so we now choose to enter the contest where you can have a nice horse.
Oh, you like that? So there's an Emmy back there.
Yeah, we got a couple Emmys, but.
And maps of charted worlds that are underwater.
This is an underwater. Yeah, it's down in it's a cenote. And down in the Yucatan, you go down into the caves here. They're all underwater. And then these guys, it's the most dangerous sport because survival is measured not by seconds, but by breaths. Of course, you'd be down there.
Yeah. But how many breaths are there in lives that have been saved? Curtis saved countless numbers of Northeast Kansans with his famous warning, and says on that fateful night that changed his life, there is no adventure in the world that tops the Topeka 1966 tornado, leaving its incredible path of devastation 50 years ago at this moment.
So,
what have you learned about the human brain and remembering things like this a half century later?
Well, I'm sure that my memory has faded, but I don't think it has, because that shock is just like a big flash camera, and it is embedded in your head. I had a guy from the Chicago Tribune come down to Independence, and he was doing a story, and he happened to wander into to the Elks Club or the Moose, and they said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm here to do Bill Curtis," and they said, "Oh, Bill Curtis, yeah, he saved our life in Topeka." Well, no one will ever forget the experience. It is our World War II, our Vietnam War. It is that moment when life did flash in front of you that is unforgettable.
It also changed your life in the fact that you realized that night the power of the broadcast word out to an entire area. What did you learn about broadcasting that night?
Yeah, well, I was headed for Wichita, and I already had accepted a job with a law firm down there. And 3 years in law school, you say, well, maybe I should be a lawyer. All of a sudden, here is this mass media where you can talk to a lot of people. I don't think there's a better experience that anybody could have that would say you can affect lives, and what you say, magnified by this tool, can impact and help people for the rest of their lives, but certainly in this moment. And it made such an impression on me, I said, sorry, no law for me. And I sent out tapes, and in 3 months, I was here in Chicago.
The 50 years, Bill, does it come back to you as though it were yesterday, or it's a foggy memory like a tin-type photograph, or does it come right back as though it were yesterday?
As crystal clear as you, just sitting here looking at you.
Wow.
It's almost every second. For instance, my wife and 6-month-old daughter, Mary Kristen, were on married housing there. And I had always said to Ellen, I said, don't worry, if it's really serious, I'll call you. Well, I was live on the air. I couldn't. And fortunately, our friends who lived next door grabbed her. They went up to the science building. As I think back, ironically, she would have been safer just where she was, because the tornado missed the married housing and hit the science building. Now, fortunately, she and all the other kids on campus were down in the basement, so they came out. Cars were in trees, it looked like a compressor. And, Washburn,
practically in ruins.
8 out of 10 or 12 buildings were piled all up, especially the law school. And I always thought that, and she probably had a better scene of it. We never actually saw the tornado. And those fresh moments when the tornado had passed on. And as you know, a thunderstorm can leave a drop here and there with that fresh feel. Ozone is still in the air, I think, from the lightning. And there it was, the end of the world, looking at the campus.
Everybody we've interviewed about after said it was completely peaceful and calm and quiet.
Yes, and that's what was strange about it. The noise had passed, and this was as if cleansing the earth. And you went out to I hate the word surreal because it's so overused, but this unnatural feel. Yeah, very serene.
Your famous words, Bill, were you really speaking to your wife and Mary Kristen? Were you speaking directly to them and said, I'm letting you all in on the message, but I'm talking to the two of them?
Yeah. No. I hope they don't hear
I wonder
this.
if that's the folklore.
I think it is.
He was warning his wife and daughter, but you were warning everybody.
Everybody.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, it's I don't know many broadcasters who have had the experience, but suddenly we built up to it.
Fate and preparation, not luck, played an enormous role in the broadcast warnings from 13 News that night, as photographer Ed Rutherford was already west of the city with the first sightings of the storm, and the warning 8 minutes before the National Weather Service gave it.
And the next one was, well, it's wiped out the apartment complex below, a brand new one below Burnett's Mound. So, and you could draw a line in your head, first sighting, second sighting, my God, it's headed for downtown. We'd better do something. Now, Charlie Ross, the general manager at the time, has since communicated through his son that he was the one who said, because we were in the process, so we knew we had to go, but somebody had to call when. Do we wait until it's in? And one of the hesitancies was the National Weather Bureau did not give the official warning that there was a tornado on the ground headed for the city. We had our eyes on it, so WIBW, the team, jumped into action, and we were ahead of them about 8 to 10 minutes, which they weren't happy about until they came, visited him, and realized, wow, you saved a lot of lives. Yeah. But anyway, so it starts roaring, and leading up to the words, I flashed then, what do I say? What do you say to convince people this is not a drill? This is the real thing. Well, you can cry. I thought about that. As a matter of fact, it was a kind of a feeling of hysteria at the responsibility and the pressure. You can cuss. Thought about that. That would have been easy for me. And then wound up with, for God's sake, take cover.
That's right. It's in this part of the city right now, 17th and Webster. At least one house was demolished there. Now all we can do, and the best service we can perform now, is to, I hope you have gotten the message by now, for the east part of Topeka, it should be alerted. The entire city was alerted earlier. It is now moving toward the north part of the city. If you live in the north part or on the northern edge, for God's sake, take cover.
As I look back, I was not shouting or screaming. I think my whole demeanor just settled down.
And there is a final reminiscence Bill Curtis wanted to share with us on the 40th anniversary of the storm from Lyon County.
And it was a hot afternoon. It was a new dedication of the Pioneer woman down there. And I said, this is going to be a short speech because it was in the sun, 100 degrees. And I still get emotional. I swear to God, every time I tell these stories. And the bleachers were full. And after the speech, I went over and I said, gee, you didn't have to stay. It's just a dedication. And they said, well, tell you, we wanted to because we were there. Said tornado, yeah. We weren't in Topeka, but we were listening to the radio and watching the television here in Emporia. They were still within range. And to me, that probably says more about the experience and those of us who are left to tell the story than anything else. It is a peak experience of your life. You'll never forget it.
That's a 90.
Topeka's tornado made news around the world. Harold Norman was among WIBW employees called into action to provide information for those out of town and people at home.
After Bill Curtis said, for God's sake, take cover, and then they started saying, will all the employees come back to the station to help? So I went to the station, and my dad worked there, Walter Norman, and he took me out at 29th and Gage, where we had a small remote truck, and I stayed there for 3 days. And I run a camera on top to feed CBS television network. People were screaming, yelling, and I smoked back then. You didn't dare light a match. And we got enough nerve. There's a lot of cars up on trees. We got the nerve to climb a couple of trees to see if there's anybody in cars, but there wasn't. People being hurt, no place to live, a disaster that people were crawling, and it just hurt me so bad. I could sit here and probably cry a little bit because so many people. And then after that, we did a telethon in the studio, and I did all of that, helped on that.
The Grand Ole Opry had been booked to play Topeka's Municipal Auditorium, but with it serving as a disaster headquarters, they agreed to come to the WIBW studios for a telethon that raised more than $50,000 for tornado victims, which included some of the station's own staff.
My supervisor was named Don Franzen back then. So his house got tore up. So between times on that, we went to his house to help him clean up.
Another WIBW employee had double reason to remember the day. Master Control Operator Jim Wright left his pregnant wife at the hospital with what they thought was a minor medical issue.
I had gone into the hospital that morning for a kidney stone, and this is what came out. She was 6 weeks early, and I was in the delivery room, and I looked out the window, and I could see all the debris flying around in the air, and it was really, really greeny black outside.
Jim was with his family at the hospital when the tornado hit, but by midnight he was back at work, the first of many long days as they worked to keep people informed in the wake of the storm. His wife with a close-up view of the emergency response.
It was really dark because the lights had gone out, but all night long there were sirens going off. The windows were open, there was water running down the hallways, and the nurses were really scared. There really weren't any nurses on our floor because they were in the basement and in the ER helping people that were hurt. I think we are so lucky to be alive. When I saw all the debris and all the things that were torn up, I thought, I can't believe that we actually lived through that and that hospital was not torn down. I think it was by the grace of God that we actually survived that tornado that night.
I've got all these in my basement.
Leading the city through those recovery efforts was then Topeka Mayor Chuck Wright.
And then these are just thank you notes.
He's 96 years old now and doesn't always verbalize his thoughts, but you can see as he looks through scrapbooks with his daughter Catherine.
That sure brings back memories, doesn't it?
Each moment chronicled on those pages is burned in his memories.
Dear sir, we want to help the people who were hurt in the tornado. He's always been a leader, but I think his leadership really shined through.
While her father immediately went to City Hall to tend to the emergency response, Catherine, then 14, went with her mother to the Civil Defense Shelter.
They needed food, they needed shelter, they needed diapers for their babies. And so Mom and I worked into the night.
Around 11 that night, her father asked if she wanted to see what was happening outside.
So I went for this amazing ride with Police Chief Dana Hummer driving and Dad on the right, and I sat in between those two men. And we went to Burnett's Mound and went all around, behind the scenes. We went over debris and down power lines. We stopped and talked to the National Guard. We talked to the citizens, rolled down the windows. Both Dana Hummer and Dad were talking with people and just surveying the damage. And that ride was a couple hours long, and it really was It was really awesome and inspiring to me.
It was one of many times she'd be awed by her father in the storm's aftermath. There was the time he went to Washington to see about assistance and simply showed up at the White House gate.
President Johnson let you in, right?
And how he ensured Washburn would have what it needed to get students back on campus.
The man said, all right, I'll give you the classrooms. And Dad said, well, we want some air conditioners in there. And he said, well, you'll just have to park them under the trees. And Dad said, sir, we have no trees. And he got the air conditioners.
And how he worked to keep the city strong and together.
I didn't see Dad for a couple of weeks. He would come home and change clothes and clean up and be off again. I saw him probably just like everyone else on WIBW TV every night, because he gave a show every night telling about what was happening with the city. And I really think that's one of the nicest things that he did, because people needed information.
And to this day, she is perhaps most awed by his powerful reaction to getting a bird's eye view of the devastation.
The next morning, when I took the helicopter ride, it just looked like somebody that had taken a 6-block wide lawnmower and gone completely through the city, from Burnett's Mound up through the airport, Philip Billard Airport. And I'm not ashamed to say it, Melissa, I shed tears because it was just awesome.
He wasn't the kind to get emotional. I think that was really special when he said that you know, he wasn't afraid to admit that he shed some tears as he flew over the city. I mean, that was his city. That's how he responded. I was very proud of him, and I still am very proud of him for his role in helping restore the city of Topeka.
50 years later, you can see how that moment in history continues to affect people today. Stories of courage, perseverance, and Ralph, most of all, stories of community.
Melissa, I think in the past hour we've learned a couple of things have not changed at all in the past 50 years. The images in their minds of that tornado damage, and also we will still give you warnings about the deadly and powerful forces of nature these tornadoes can bring. Thanks for joining us for our 1-hour special, Topeka's Tragedy, Remembering the '66 Tornado. From the top of Burnett's Mound, I'm Ralph Hill.
And I'm Melissa Bruner. Stay safe.